This is Abigail Carl Clausen, and I'm here with Clara Enns. It is February 7th, 2018. We're out here in Campos 101, and we're going to have a little conversation today about Clara's experiences here in the Campos and elsewhere. So thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Abby. It's nice having this chat. I'm Clara Enns. In Mexico, it could be Clara Enns Peter, so we take the full name, right? With the mother's maiden name added in. Yeah. I am now, gotta think, 36 years old. I've lived in the Campos most of my life, with little stints in different areas.
Yeah. So when you were growing up here in the Campos, where specifically did you live? And what did daily life look like at that time?
Okay. When I was born, my parents lived in Campos 114, and that's where we spent most of my initial years. And my dad's a farmer, so we lived on a small farm. At the time, he had 30 acres, with our house on there that we were building in those years. And so with some cows and some dogs and cats and kind of the normal expected livestock on the farm as well. Other than that, he grew corn as a cash crop, and it's a very, very rural farm life.
Absolutely. And so that time when you were growing up, what kind of interactions with people who were not Mennonite were considered normal, and then what interactions were seen as kind of atypical?
I always think that my family was pretty atypical to begin with. So later on, I've come to realize more of this. That the way my mother grew up, she grew up in a much more traditional family. Yet at the same time, my grandpa, or my opa, we distinguished him from my other grandparents. My opa is known as a very open fellow in general. If there was people coming to his house, he'd invite them for lunch, and they wouldn't be given something outside in the plate. Rather, they would be coming into the home and sit on the same table with the whole family. It was a larger family, so it's 10 siblings that grew up, 2 that didn't grow into adulthood, so it's 12 initially, but so it's a larger family. And my mother would talk about that there was often sort of strangers at the table, and so he's known in the surrounding ranchos as someone that they knew when they would interact with. Yet the family in itself was quite traditional, and not such a stickler to some of the rules with vehicles and so on. My grandpa didn't really do it himself so much, but he would sort of overlook when his sons would start putting the tires on the tractor and so on. He wasn't too strict about it, and they couldn't enforce it against his sons because they weren't baptized yet. So
absolutely.
Oma had a hard time sometimes with it. But she's a deeply religious person, and she had a very sharp consciousness and conscious that she didn't want to offend other people. So I think that was part of what drove her to be more traditional, more would be the right word, pious maybe in a way, but
for sure.
Though she was a very gentle lady. She wasn't strict. Much more in a loving way, that she wanted to guide her family.
Absolutely.
And on the other side, my Enns family from my father's side were known to be a bit troublemakers and rebels. So my father grew up going to work seasonally in the U.S. and Canada together with my with his parents. He was the youngest, and so he, starting probably around age 11, he would accompany them to Canada and to California to work for seasons.
Yeah.
And just this general travel opened up their world, and I guess my grandpa just had a bigger view of the world, so it wasn't as strict, yet we lived in the Campos, surrounded by old colony and much more stricter thinking and living people than we did. All of this, led to some interactions with people outside of the Mennonite community as well. Yeah, more on a friendly basis, or work, of course, much more. But it wasn't unusual for, if a Mexican couple or a man or a woman would show up at our house, that my mother would go outside and talk with them as much as she could. I mean, her Spanish wasn't great, and she had a hard time communicating with them, but she would never hesitate to approach them or talk with them. So I think that was very unusual, and I, in a way, thought that I could never understand some people who would withdraw so much from that interaction. Because it's not what I saw at home.
Exactly.
So it took a while for me to understand why women would withdraw a lot, or I can never understand why men wouldn't want their women to at least go outside and say hi, and it's like, yes, my husband's not here, kind of thing. So it was much more open in that way. We especially had one couple from the local rancho that they were regular visitors at our house. They were a generation older than my parents. Their youngest was quite a few years older than I was. So most of their children at that time were married and out of the house. And occasionally the youngest daughter would come to my house, but it was almost a weekly basis. They would come and visit and spend a few hours at our place, and they didn't expect to be hosted as guests necessarily. The husband would always plow our gardens in the summer and help out with the little odds and ends that my dad needed help with. And the woman, Carmelita, she would be inside with us. She would help wash the laundry. She would help in the garden. She would help make lunch at lunchtime if they were there. She would always bring tortillas, homemade, fresh tortillas that were still warm when they would come. And my mom, in turn, would give her some fresh bread or whatever bread and buns that we had at home and send them back with her. So I remember that little exchange is one of the memories that I cherish and that are just wonderful for me from all that time.
And like you were saying, just like right from the beginning, like that kind of exchange was just very normal in your family.
In my family it was very, very normal. And that too, like they were very welcome. They were family friends. It's not just someone who is an outsider.
Absolutely.
And sure, there was occasions and other people, they wouldn't have had that same reception, but it's just, in our case, it was more a normal exchange. Like some people you're more friendly with and more open with, and so others you may be acquainted with, but you wouldn't necessarily host them in your house all the time or receive them as much.
Let's see. So part of what you do is designing and making of formal wear, including wedding gowns, quinceañera dresses. Describe how you started working in this field and how you developed your skills and tastes.
I started sewing. I jokingly say that I was born with a needle in my hand, or that I give my mom the fault. It's my mom's fault. Because apparently, my mom loved to sew. She was always a big sewer. She would sew all my dresses and hers, and a lot of my dad's clothing, and later my brother's clothing, and so on. She enjoyed it, and so she would have me sitting on the windowsill in front of the sewing machine, that she could keep an eye out for me and not me get into all kinds of trouble. Yeah. And I think I just shared that with her later on. So 3 years old and 4 years old, I would always grab all the extra buttons she had and all the scrap materials, and that's what I'd be sewing. I was only allowed to sew by hand because I couldn't do as much damage there as with a sewing machine. So, but she would have to thread the needle because I couldn't do it yet myself. And but I was always sewing on buttons. And starting at about age 6, she couldn't keep me away from the machine anymore. So as soon as she turned her back, then I'm sitting there and tinkering on it. My first foray on the machine was at my grandma's house, and Mom was doing laundry there. We didn't have our own washing machine, so we went to grandma's house and did it. Grandma wasn't home, luckily for me. I must have been about 4 years old because my brother was just walking. So that's why I didn't have an exact age, but somewhere around that age. And so Grandma wasn't home, Mom was outside doing the laundry, and I get the sewing machine here is open with a green apron on top of it that was in the middle of sewing. I took that out and grabbed a scrap piece of material that was lying on the side and pushed it under the sewing machine. Probably got about 3 stitches, and I stuck my finger right into it with the fabric. And it's one of these funny things that, so I'd sewn through my finger. It didn't break the needle, but then I ran and it's like I'm bleeding and crying to Mama. And so I was always very interested in that aspect. Starting at around age 6, couldn't keep me away anymore. Playing dolls for me was making dresses for them. I cut and triple cut every little piece of scrap fabric I could find. And start sewing, little shirts and skirts and dresses for my dolls. And so I kept some of those samples till recently. My first full dress that I made I was 10. And my mom showed me how to sew the pieces together to make it nice. And I kind of went from there. A lot of it was self-taught, and my mom would guide me with techniques or items that I hadn't done before yet. We moved to Canada when I was 17, and it was my, I'm pretty good at sewing at this point. And my cousin was getting married and asked me if I would do her bridesmaid dresses. And so they were relatively simple. Nothing too fancy that I hadn't done before. There was a few things that were a little new to me. She wanted them lined and so on to make it more formal because I'd never done formal wear. And but that's sort of where it got started. So I did hers, and then someone saw them and asked me if I would do them for another wedding, and so on until in the year 2000. 2001. It must have been 2001 that I was asked to do a wedding dress. For someone who's going to have a very simple ceremony, and she didn't want to spend a whole lot on a wedding dress, and asked if I would make hers, and so I did. Which, I see how much I've changed and grown, and how I work now. But it wasn't too bad. I mean, I wouldn't do that one again. But
and this was all still in Canada at that time?
This was still in Canada. And then coming back, some of my closer friends were getting married, and so I started doing their wedding dresses, and was learning more. Bought some patterns for their dresses that I would alter. I've forever altered patterns. Like they're a guideline to me, but I would always find ways of altering them to fit more what I wanted. Smaller things like a higher neckline, a lower neckline, or I want the waistline in a different place, or things like that. So more the easy changes. And for a few years, I would do that off and on. Occasionally, have a dress, and then somewhat, met another person who was working here, and she had connected me with a seamstress, a designer in Cuauhtemoc, and said that the designer was always looking for someone to help her out in busy times. Yeah. And so she introduced us, and one day we hadn't really settled on something official or formal, no official job offer, but just one day called and said that she was really busy for the next week or two, and if I could help her out. Yeah. And that's how I started working with her, and ended up staying there for 3 years. Oh wow! Yeah. And she had studied design and textile manufacturing. Did much more couture, higher end things, handmade, and to order and so on. Yeah. She had techniques using a corset or built-in corset and so on that were new to me. Yeah. I mean, I could sew, but there's details to it that
the construction of the garment, a lot of new techniques. Yeah.
And so within a few months, I was pretty comfortable there, and but stayed there for about 3 years in total, and developed a lot of how I work now.
Yeah, absolutely. And so primarily the clients from that place in Cuauhtemoc were from the Mexican community, formal wear. Yeah,
that's really where I learned my fluent Spanish. In school, I was always in Spanish taught schools, but because the students would mostly be Mennonite, then we would talk English or German, and I was never as comfortable in Spanish. But then I, stepping into this workplace where my boss and whoever else may be helping out, as well as most of the clients. I mean, I remember just a handful of Mennonite clients that started showing up and coming there in part because I would be talking about it.
For sure.
So being surrounded with Spanish all day, every day, that's where I really started to speak it much more. And, of course, then I had all the jargon of one industry there.
Yeah.
But it did help in just conversation a lot, and grew from there. Yeah,
absolutely. And so you said that was around 2001, where
I worked with her 2005 to 2008.
Oh, okay,
yeah, and then I needed a change of scenery.
For sure.
I loved the work, but it was very stressful and very. It's timing, and so I just needed to get out of there for a bit.
Absolutely.
And I had been approached from the museum that they were, on a few occasions, that they were looking for someone who spoke English and Spanish and who would be willing to work there as a tour guide and for whatever came up, kind of thing. It was much smaller at the time still, so. Because I'd had that, and they'd approached me a few times, so finally decided I'll give them a call and see if they need one right now, and someone, and I did, and then started working at the museum, and then did wedding dresses sort of on the side. I would have 2 to 3 a year that I would do on weekends, and and evenings, and work on that while I was still working my day job.
Let's see. So, in addition to your skills as a designer and seamstress, you're known for your culinary accomplishments. In 2016, you competed in the national cooking competition, MasterChef Mexico. So, talk a little bit about that experience.
I'd seen the show MasterChef in Australia, which I now realize must have been one of the first seasons when they initially started. Yeah. And I had a tiny little idea of what it was. Yeah. So then, but I wasn't watching it in Mexico. I hadn't really paid attention at all.
Yeah, for sure.
I don't pay attention to Mexican TV in general. So just one day from the museum, which I still know the staff, and especially administrators, that gave me a call and said there's going to be a casting from MasterChef, and that they were going to invite them in any community to come and present something, and they were looking for someone from this community. Yeah. And they had a few questions or kind of requirements a profile that they were looking for. Yeah. And someone who may, who's more traditional, who didn't necessarily have to speak Spanish that well, and so on. I said, well, I don't fit that profile for one. For the other, I was over my head with work. It was like, I have no time for that. And on the other hand, I didn't think I was nearly good enough to be on a competition like this. Yeah. I do like cooking. I enjoy cooking. I enjoy trying different things. I mean, throughout my travels, that's one of the things I most enjoy, to get to know new dishes and new plates and all of that. So I'm interested in it, but didn't pay much attention to it. And we had another mutual friend, so our group of friends was just like, oh, you should enter. And so we made sure that she had all the bases and requirements, and met with that, and went to the competition. But then the morning of the casting, the administrator of the museum calls me and says, Clara, please show up, come, because they'd had quite a few women cancel that were signed up who were going to come. Yeah. And
so the casting was on in Cuauhtemoc and Chihuahua?
The casting was at the museum.
Oh, okay. Here. Wow.
So the general casting was done in Juarez, but they did a special casting, which they do occasionally in different areas. But they stopped here in Cuauhtemoc, a few people, not the whole crew, but just a few, stopped to do a special casting at the museum, having invited all the Mennonite community. Yeah. And so they were just at the museum where it's like, we really need a few more people here to show up. And I'd been working all night long, which I will sometimes do when I'm busy. And one of my helper, who's a good seamstress, that's sort of the time she can work. So I'd worked through most of the night. I was tired. I had little to sleep, and I hadn't prepared anything. Which are all things that I was telling the administrator. It's like, figure something out. Something simple, but just come here before by 11 or so. So there's all kinds of hoops we had to jump through to make this happen, but I did show up just as the last person was presenting their dish, and I showed up and run inside, get changed. We wanted someone traditional looking, which I mean, I do have traditional dress that I've worn at the museum. Mostly I don't wear it in my everyday life, but just put that on and ran in, present my dish, and so they're talking with people who were there, and occasionally, but I soon saw that they did have quite an interest in me. So I figured, I guess it wasn't my dish wasn't too bad.
Now, what was it that you presented for them?
Vranakia, and with just a simple jam, homemade jam, and it's a very typical dish, but nothing fancy. And but I mean, and part of it is I don't know what they were looking at for all of it, but there's so many different aspects that are considered in a competition. But sure. I did get an invitation, as well as my friend, to come to the grand casting, and it was just step by step further on from there. Yeah. And so you went through the kind of bigger casting, and then for the show itself, how many were selected? So the castings are done in different areas of the country. It's done differently in different generations. For us, we're then 300 were selected to come to a bigger casting. And then it was stage 2, 3, and 4, where it was filtered down to 18 people.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And the 18 are then selected to go into where the 18 competitors, really.
Yeah.
And so that's when we got into the big game.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So all of a sudden, you're in this. Was the show itself filmed in Mexico City, or where was that?
It's filmed in various places.
Yeah.
So a lot of it is in installations in Mexico City, and then the Retos de Campo, as they're known, they'll be in different areas, and we would sometimes travel for that.
Yeah, and kind of showcasing like the different foods from the different
foods,
areas
of Mexico. Yeah. So we had the coffee plantations, and we did see the first team challenge was done in San Miguel de Allende. So that was a very interesting experience. Colonial town, and
absolutely. So what was it like going from here, that you had everything kind of going, you were working like crazy, and then all of a sudden you're in this very public spotlight on this television show? What's that like?
Well, to be competing, for one, I had to then make room for all the filming. Which drove me half crazy. Because all of a sudden I had, 3 months work to squish into a very short time.
Yeah, absolutely.
And which I ended up taking one of the wedding dresses with me and working in my spare time at the show in between filming. And evenings and nights, which, our evenings were very short to begin with. And then I'm there half the night still sewing away to make sure this dress gets done.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the good part for me was that we were filming, but it wasn't airing at the same time yet. So I could still move around and do my work relatively anonymously, which is
for sure.
Which is usually what I prefer.
Absolutely.
I'm happy to talk to people, but I am more of an introvert. So
absolutely.
Because once it was on air, that's when it started exploding a whole lot more.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it was a huge change. I've never sought fame that way. I never cared to be on TV. I commented more than once that I would happily do this competition. I would have been easily convinced to the competition if it wasn't if it wasn't taped and it wasn't so public.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would have been a lot happier to do it then. But yes, you achieve things very publicly, and you fail very publicly if things go wrong there. And it is a competition. Sooner or later, you will be out.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, which then also becomes very public. But,
absolutely. Well, and then knowing the results kind of ahead of time, and then like it's kind of unfolding, like.
That's the other thing that we in the competition knew, who was gonna be off the show that's airing on Sunday.
Exactly.
So to sort of keep that to ourselves as well, and I'll have a non-disclosure part to our competition there too. So to keep it interesting for the other people.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the interesting thing is like so they did this special casting here in the Campos, and so they were looking, specifically for people from the Mennonite community to be participating. Did you feel that you were expected to be a spokesperson for the Mennonite community in some ways?
Part of what the casting is done, and there's special invitations extended to numerous cultures and groups of people in Mexico.
Yeah, for sure.
While it's a competition, it is at the same time a showcase of all of Mexico.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's 18 competitors, but we have 32 states in Mexico, and the food is very, very regional.
Absolutely.
We have completely different food here in the north compared to even Monterrey, and the further south you go, it's completely changes.
Yeah.
So being a national TV show, that's part of what is looked for. That it will. There's a chance that everyone gets a chance to showcase their part.
Absolutely.
And you have to prove your worth. And to be eligible and get in, but so special groups that they'll hear about or that may be interesting. The production makes an effort to specifically invite them. So that was the special casting in the museum. Someone somewhere told them about the Mennonites, and you know that it's a group of people who've lived here for a long time, and so they were interested. So yes, in a way, I knew that I would be representing Mennonites as a community. But I am also not the traditional Mennonite who wears very traditional garb and who's much more reserved, as I see it, mostly because they don't speak Spanish.
Yeah, for sure.
And so the mold, if we have a mold for the Mennonite woman, didn't fit me anyway.
Yeah, absolutely.
But at the same time, while I wanted to show that there is a little more to the Mexican view than just a photo. The image Mexicans in general may have is the person, the couple, man or a woman, selling cheese on the street, cheese and cookies on the street corners.
Absolutely.
So that's sort of what they know about it, and the occasional report on TV. And so being this show, it would be a larger showcase, and they'll see a little more about our culture and life and how we are. So yes, I in a way wanted to make it worth or show that there's more to it. I don't normally wear a head covering, for example, but I knew that on the show that would be something that would identify me. And it would make me a little different from the others, which isn't a bad thing. And I also wore dresses, while not so very traditional. I wore dresses that were more in keeping of the Mennonite view or worldview, that as they would like to be seen.
For sure.
And so while still not, I feel okay with that. I wanted to give a good representation while opening other people's minds.
Absolutely. And so in a way, you were also sort of like a spokesperson for Mexico, like in a larger way, like to the Mennonite community, like as well, and that impacting your decisions there on the show. I didn't want to represent or do anything there that would be very offensive to our community. Absolutely.
I mean, I don't have to do what is normally prescribed, for the Mennonite woman. I've never completely fallen in those footsteps. I would have been married at 20 or something like that if I wanted to. So I've never followed that mold, but I still wanted to do us proud.
Exactly. So how has life changed and or stayed the same since being on the show?
Not in large parts that it's changed. I would have had, if I were interested to go into something culinary, a restaurant or opening a place or things like that, it would have given me a lot of exposure and opened a lot of doors. So, I mean, a year and a half, 2 years down the line, I know that there is still some doors that would be open to me because of it. I could do an apprenticeship. I could go into one of the larger restaurants or a nicer restaurant that I'm
that a normal person might not get a chance that easily.
For sure.
Especially with having not studied culinary arts. But it wasn't really where I was heading. I have considered that previously. I have really thought about it now, but it's not where life took me. A few months before the competition, I had started midwifery training. And that was my teenage dream. So it was always in the back of my mind, and I sort of knew even then that if I had to choose one or the other, that midwifery would win out. And so that's more the direction I've taken, and
for sure,
I haven't opened up a restaurant. So.
So talk a little bit about, you mentioned moving more and more in this direction of midwifery. How did you initially become involved in the work? You mentioned those courses a little bit.
Back when I was finishing high school, I planned on going into midwifery in Canada as bachelor's degree, and so on. Then life took a turn in a different direction, and I couldn't see myself handling everything that I had to shoulder plus school, so I didn't study, but it was always in the back of my mind. Then just by chance or in one of these moments in life, I met a midwife, and was an herbal clinic, and was talking to people there, and she said that mentioned in bypassing that she was a midwife, and then I pricked my ears and I got to talk to you, and so we did arrange to meet and had a coffee and had a chat, and she was saying that she was looking for women to form a group to be teaching, and that she was going to start soon, within a month, and I became more and more interested in that. I wanted to know more details, the cost, the time involved as well, because I did have, I have 8 and 10 months of commitments in wedding dresses. I can't just completely stop that overnight. So I needed to know sort of what extra time I would have to be scheduling into if I wanted to take the classes. And but it was very accessible. She was very flexible. We're also guinea pigs, so we were the first kind of group. We didn't know. We figured it out as we went. We didn't know how things would go. We had a general idea of how long it would take. But it ended up taking a little longer than we'd expected. And so I didn't want to leave the classes, and so even with the competition, MasterChef, and with my other sewing classes, there's moments where I missed out. But I feel I wasn't too far behind, even if I did miss a few classes. That because it was something I've been interested in for 20 years. So as a reader, I had been reading up a lot. There was information that wasn't entirely new to me, and that did help me throughout our classes. So all in all, I think we had about 16 or 17 months that we had weekly classes and some clinical experience, and after that have moved into a lot more of the clinical part and more of the experience as an apprentice.
And so was this through the Servicios de Salud, through something private?
Midwifery is not officially a career here, so there is no official studies. Our teacher, she's a registered midwife in New Mexico. And through invitation from various Mennonite families, moved here 3 years ago. And opened up Casa Geburt, a birth center where we're now practicing. none of this is really related to any of the official health services.
For sure.
So it is very much private attention. Unfortunately or unfortunately, depending on how we look at it, it's not really regulated.
Yeah.
And which is something the the Mexican Association for Midwives, la Asociación Mexicana de Partería, which was formed just 5 years ago, is working a whole lot with in getting certification and working together with the International Confederation of Midwives to create a sort of standard that would be appropriate for Mexico, and to create a certification where we hopefully can be part of and can get more recognition through that.
Yeah.
As it stands now, we're lay women working in conjunction with doctors, which we have. We're very, very fortunate in how we can work with our doctors and gynecologists to support our work and support us throughout complications and normal births.
Yeah, absolutely. And so midwifery has really been part of Mennonite culture for a long time. For you, is this also a cultural endeavor as well as the medical and professional work?
It is sort of all integrated, yes. We used to have the children at home.
Yeah.
The way I see it, it's sort of the people my age, so the 30s and 40-year-olds, around that time is when they started going to hospitals a lot more.
Yeah.
There was more access to doctors, and that's when they started seeking that attention much more.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure has helped with some of the mortality, infant mortality as well as maternal deaths. And but somewhere along the way we lost midwifery, and in the last 20 years, 25 years, it has gone over so far to the other side and been so medicalized, which is unfortunate. There's a lack of information that was here, a lack of education to some degree, that childbirth and women's health in general is not talked about.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of just no knowledge, very little knowledge, or a shame surrounding it that women have lost the information they did have. Breastfeeding is a complete lost art for so many women here. And this is stepping back and empowering women in our community to take back what they need. We have a lot of traumatized women, such a hugely high rate of C-sections, and which needs to change. World Health Organization, the guidelines for there, it's like we need to change. Mexico in general,
absolutely,
has a very, very high rate and is being pushed and incentivized to change that. And we Mennonites form a big part of that. The C-section rate in our communities is much, much higher than it is in general in the Mexican community, in Mexico in general. So we need this more, or there's a bigger need, or bigger rate that we need to change here as well.
Would you attribute some of that loss of information, the loss of empowerment, and then this higher rate of C-sections among Mennonites to language barriers that exist when women, and especially traditional women, are interfacing like with the medical system in Mexico?
A big part of it is language barrier.
Yeah.
And it may be the biggest one.
Yeah.
I don't know which one is bigger, the lack of information, or because then not knowing you can't advocate for yourself.
Yeah.
And there's so many, I've heard this from before I was 20.
Yeah.
You know, I would hear stories of, well, the doctor said this, and basically that amounts to the doctor scared them into a C-section.
For sure.
And when there was no real medical reason for it.
Yeah.
As midwives, we know, and even not as a midwife, you don't have to be a midwife to know that it is a lot more convenient for a doctor to perform a C-section that is scheduled than having to wait around to wait for when is your baby going to come, and when you are in labor, then when is it going to be born?
Well, and that financial incentive as well.
Yeah, and financially, you know, they get more money from a C-section than from a normal birth. Yeah. And so I think something's wrong there.
Yeah.
To some degree. Yeah. At least, and the convenience for the medical system. Yeah. And it's no secret. Yeah. All over the world. Yeah. You combine that with a lack of information, and they can easily scare any husband into signing a C-section consent. Yeah. And the woman as well, because of course the parents don't want to harm the baby either. Yeah. But if you don't know what does harm a baby and what does not harm the baby, what is better, what is best for mom, physically and emotionally, and for the baby in the end, if you don't know the information, then you can never advocate for yourself, for your partner, in front of the doctors, that they can't take all these steps. Yeah. And so for part of what my job is and will be is attending the women who seek us out. Yeah. And the second part is to bring this information out. That whoever does go to the medical team and health systems, that they know what is okay and what isn't.
Yeah, absolutely. How do you see the traditional and the modern intersecting in this work of midwifery?
I think the traditional still, there is a respect and to some way a deep knowledge of the traditional, of what used to be. Yeah. And deep down, it makes sense to many of the traditional women. Yeah. Whereas this return to midwifery is in a way a very modern concept. Yeah. And so I think we have a deep knowledge of that. What used to be was okay. Yeah. With more training and more knowledge, then yes, we can identify when things go wrong. Yeah. Because that is what the medical establishment wants, and what we want to keep women and babies safe. Yeah. And healthy. So yes, we want to take care of that, but that it wasn't all wrong. Yeah. How things were done earlier. Yeah. And that nature, that we go back to trusting nature as well. And I think it does go, because midwifery in a way is a very modern concept, it does appeal to a young generation of mothers. Yeah.
So kind of in that same vein, alternative medicine is practiced across many cultures in Mexico, and has a large presence in Mennonite culture. I'm wondering what your opinion is on how alternative medicine in the Mennonite community has that influenced the type of cross-cultural interactions that are happening between communities.
I'm not sure cross-cultural or... I think it's, while alternative medicine is very much a part of our culture too. Sometimes, well, it's not sought out so much in other cultures or in Mexico. I see many of it is sought out in the U.S. or from Mennonites in the U.S. As well. So a lot of it does come sort of trickle down from the U.S. instead of not so much from the southern parts. There's many cultures in Mexico who practice herbalism and other alternative medicine. I mean, the religious and the witchery and dark magic that is related to alternative medicine would very much be something that's rejected by the Mennonite. So I think that most of it is looked more from the north where those components aren't part or at least not displayed.
And so that like within a specific context, and so like even though that there's alternative medicine happening in many communities in Mexico, it's kind of in a parallel and not like intersecting.
Not so much intersecting with us.
For sure.
I can see them more because there is such a freedom of information now and a flow of information that we will get more of the information here too as people are seeking out alternative or just seeking out knowledge in general. But and specifically, if they're seeking out alternative medicine, then it's easier to find now.
For sure.
To know sort of what direction to take or where it could be found. And sure, there is places in the areas where the Mennonites will go to as well, and maybe an herbalist or someone who's practices various forms of This could be chiropractic, could be
for sure
herbs, could be other treatments.
And so with things like specifically women working as chiropractors, do you feel that there are people from outside the Mennonite community seeking out some treatment from them, or is it mostly still people from the Mennonite community?
No, there's always Mexican community coming to seek out chiropractors here, and I mean, we call them chiropractors. Some of them are just massages, massage therapists. Many lay people who don't have official studies, but who have a talent and a certain knack for it.
For sure.
And but I'm sure if we were to ask them, they would all have a variety of clients that come seek them out. And, the Mexican community in the surroundings, definitely. And so we will occasionally seek out their alternative caregivers, but I think specifically Tlaxcala type is very much our domain.
Absolutely. Let's see. Okay. And so kind of coming full circle here, looking at the ways that things have changed over the years, especially with cross-cultural interactions. What are the ways that you have seen interactions change in your lifetime?
There's a lot more social contact cross-culturally. It didn't used to be that you had Mexican friends. And while that's always been somewhat normal for me, but it wasn't until I was working in the Mexican community that I really became or had a larger number and closer Mexican friends. Had occasional ones, but
nothing too close. And but it's seen more and more now that, especially the younger generation, they will have closer friends.
Yeah.
And that does lead to more emotional relationships.
Yeah.
And more couples and
yeah.
marriages that will be crossing the cultures, and that is changing. And to some degree, I find where I see that's necessary.
Yeah.
Genetically speaking, I think we need a different influence.
Yeah, for sure.
So knowing that and seeking that, we can't remain within just our Mennonite communities.
Yeah.
And so, health-wise, genetically speaking, we need to find partners elsewhere.
Yeah.
And wherever that is, and the easiest one is close to home.
Yeah. So the name of this project is Rebels, Exiles, and Bridge Builders. Which of these words, if any, would you use to describe your cross-cultural interactions, and why?
Rebels, bridge builders, and
exiles.
And exiles. For me, probably more rebel and bridge builder.
Yeah.
Bridge builder is probably very much my style, and I get that comment more from others that I'm sometimes not even quite so aware of.
Yeah, for sure.
Exile, probably not quite voluntary exile for little bits, but I'll always come back. Community is in my blood, and I do like it here as much as I can criticize it sometimes. And I see many things that are wrong here, but there's also many things right.
Yeah,
and,
absolutely.
So I'll definitely be staying and trying to change what needs to change.
Yeah.
So that part is probably rebel, and I don't always follow the mold, and I don't follow the rules. There's nothing written, but the unwritten rule that a woman doesn't travel by herself. A woman, most women will get married. Most people will get married, women and men. But she won't normally live on her own, and especially not in Quiltam with an apartment to myself. So that was definitely not the norm. But rebel in a way that I don't pay attention to what is said. I just assumed that there was all kinds of gossip when I did that, but I didn't care. Because I knew that what I was doing, and that there's nothing wrong with it, and this is what I need to do. So
absolutely. Cool. And so just to finish out here, what do you think that cross-cultural interactions in the region will look like in the future? And what are your hopes?
In the future, I think there will be a lot more mixed marriages, mixed couples. We are seeing that trend, and it will continue. I think it's necessary in a way. I hope that we get to learn the Mexican culture more. We have flaws, they have flaws. Every community, every culture, every country has flaws. But we can learn from each other. And there's many things that we could do very well if we paid attention to how they do them. I hope we don't lose our traditions. Traditions, it can include the dress code. I am very much for changing up what I wear, but I also see a value in keeping our traditional dress, which is more distinguished for the women, the usual.
For sure.
But there's beauty to that one as well. Open up to what the openness and the hospitality the Mexican community can help us with.
let's not forget how to take care of our sick and our women.
Poquito, sí, gracias.
One of the most beautiful things that I always or have noticed more in the last 10 years is that our pregnant women or women that have a baby, families that have a baby, will receive food for a number of weeks. A person who is sick will generally receive food at home, and so the family doesn't have to worry so much about it. And that when caring for a sick family member, that they can do that without having to worry too much about how they're going to feed the rest of the family. So that is something we do very well, and I would like to keep that. I hope that stays here. Other communities can learn from that. There's a close-knit component to the community that's great. There's many experiences in this last year that I appreciate a whole lot. There's something about living and growing up in a community and they know you all your life. That can help you out when you're in dire need. So that would be great to keep.
Absolutely.
And yet open up, be accepting to other cultures. We aren't the best. No one's really the best, and we aren't the only ones who do things right. And we need to acknowledge that we're not better than others, and different colors and races and cultures have something to teach us.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having this conversation today.
Gladly.